Well, I finally started having original thoughts again. So, I wanted to try and lay some of them out and see if they come together. Right now, I feel like it's a bunch of disconnected ideas, but usually they're secretly about the same thing. So, we shall see. Let's see. Where do I want to start? So, lately, I have been doing my usual thing. It happens once or twice a year, where I will go back to a lot of my old music that I used to listen to, and sermons that I used to listen to, and all of those. Very narrow, very limited, frankly, objectively not great materials. But I don't know, man, that's what I grew up in. So it has something for me. And I am in a constant process of reconciling that with the new, bigger world that I live in now. And I don't know, it's a process, and it requires a lot of discernment, I would say, on both ends of the spectrum, because what I was raised in was obviously super fundamentalist, and limiting in that regard of being an ultimate authority of God over you, and who says horrible things and you have to obey those, and very fear and control based. But then, of course, now that I'm kind of thrown out into the wider world, you have to watch out for that same philosophy of fear, control, shame, just in different terms. It's very easy to fall from one to the other. And that's something that I have noticed and been working through, because I'm always trying to watch very carefully the ways that I'm thinking, and what beliefs or habits where I'm putting my attention, what I'm letting myself become. And so lately, I've kind of been, let's see, so I was super fundamentalist religious, right? And then I kind of came out of that into a more mystical type religion, and I was looking at orthodoxy, and of course looking a little bit at other religions, although I'm so inveterate Christian that I usually don't go very far outside of that, and looking at philosophy a little bit. And then I have been on more of a mental health side of things for a while, and also just a life and getting a social life and just being in the world without so much deliberation about it. But I've kind of, obviously that puts me in the stream of things without all of this structure. I come from having so much structure to having no structure. But of course there are structures in everything, and if you don't choose one will choose you. At least we get to choose the thing that eats us. A God must feed. That's the Silt Verses, which is a podcast that I believe just wrapped up. I think it just finished. But yeah, so I've been doing a lot of fandoms and watching shows and entertainment, and just basically non-formal living in the 21st century stuff. But then now, and of course that comes with its own pitfalls, and I'm always trying to crawl my way back into a more ordered faith, just because I had it very briefly, and I was very happy when I had a more in that, yeah, there was a nice balance that I struck at some point, and I seem to have gone out of that. So anyway, occasionally I'll kind of get back into all the religious stuff, which of course then comes with its own pitfalls. So I'm kind of oscillating between these two worlds, and I think it's good for me, you know, like one balances out the other, and one corrects the other in a lot of ways. But I'm still very much at the point of trying to understand how to like live in the world, because when you come from a really strict, where you have to have blinders, or you have blinders on all the time, and you have a logical thing telling you, well, it's not very logical, but you know what I mean, like rules all the time. It's just a totally different mode of being in the world than it is if you're just kind of living. And it is confusing for me. Because fundamentalism does not give you the tools to be a human being. It gives you the tools to really be to be some sort of puppet, I guess, for the abstract, for the doctrine and for the ideology. But it does not give you the tools to be a human being. And I was talking a couple of weeks ago with somebody who was talking about that they have a residual. They were also deconstructing, because my church, it's mostly deconstructed people. It's cool. But they were talking about how they have this like residual fear of hell, which I've heard a lot of people talk about. Still, even though like you know in your head that eternal hell isn't real, there's still a habitual fear that God's still going to send you to hell. And I would say like I kind of have that, but just like for the existence of God. And I wouldn't say this is as much of a bad thing as like to be afraid of hell is, but like even in my most like atheist moments, my actual thought is not like there's a whole, okay, well, what if, you know, God isn't real and things are just kind of random or whatever. But underneath that, there's usually this sense of like, well, I guess that God or the ultimate higher power in the universe doesn't want me to believe in God right now, so I guess I'd better not try to if I'm not supposed to, if I'm not finding it in me too, kind of thing. Like there's always like a personal touch to it and some sort of sense of agency behind it in the way that I'm thinking about it. And that's just the way that my brain works, you know, it just is. But yeah. But I do not find that I still have a fear of hell. And that was kind of the linchpin of my deconstruction and my initial breaking free of the isms. But so I think that's part of it. It's kind of like, but also I think that same pattern of retaining what's been so ingrained in you, even though in your mind you know it's not true, happens to me just in a different and kind of subtler way. Because again, I'm not afraid anymore that I'm aware of on any level of like a literal hell or a God that would judge me and send me to literal hell. That idea is very empty to me, and it's gone away. But now what I am afraid of, like what haunts me, you could say, because I think a lot of people, you know, you get haunted still by hell. Obviously, if you believe in it, you are, and then even if you don't, you could be. But what haunts me is generally not that, but rather it is like pessimistic nihilism, like pessimistic materialist nihilism, or nihilist materialism, or whatever. So the classic, everything is just atoms and it's all meaningless and nobody out there cares about you or your pursuits and you're gonna die alone kind of thing. And it's all random and anything could happen to you. Which is, first of all, not really a coherent worldview. Second of all, I'm not putting that up against religion, and like there are plenty of optimistic nihilistic or optimistic materialist type like perspectives on the world, like that aren't religious but that still allow for life. Because I was saying it doesn't give you the tools to like be human. And there's plenty of, yeah, the problem isn't the materialism. But the thing is, like, I fall so easily into this limited, skewed set of assumptions about a materialist universe. In my mind, because of having been predisposed by the whole God's gonna send you to hell. Like, and the funny thing is, those two ideas seem like they're polar opposites. The people who are eternal conscious torment believers and theists would want you to believe that their philosophy of a literal, like, God being who created the world literally and will send you to fiery hell or to heaven after death, that's very spiritual, quote unquote, that it's opposed to materialism, that it's opposed to nihilism, that it's opposed to a small human-centric view. Like, they think that they're the opposite of that. But in reality, it's the same structure, but just in different ways of putting it, in different language. Essentially, the sort of feeling of it is really the same. And that's why you can go from one to the other. Well, I actually don't know. I would be interested if someone had gone from, like, nihilistic. Well, I guess people do, right? They're atheists or whatever, and then they, like, convert to a religion. They're like, yeah, now I have the answers. But I don't know a lot of people like that. But on the way that I used to believe, right, it's the same picture of the universe, and it's the same sort of way of being in the universe, very similar, just with a little different shuffling in terms. And again, I'm not talking bad about, like, people who aren't religious or who are materialist in their view of things, but rather a certain doom and gloom, everything's meaningless, which is really very shallow, just like eternal conscious torment is shallow, and almost like in the same ways. So on one hand, the way that I grew up believing, there's an ultimate authority over this whole world, one principle, one authority. It does not matter your personal perspective. That's just going to steamroller you. That one reality and one authority and one narrative will steamroller you no matter what you might put forth to the contrary, and that's God and God's laws or God's ways or the scripture and all of that. And then and that funnels you into one meaning for your life, you know, whether you go to heaven or you go to hell. And you are inherently corrupt no matter what you may try to do to the contrary, and you're gonna, like, get punished for it, you know, kind of thing. And then the, like, pessimistic nihilism very similarly also has one ultimate principle, one ultimate authority over all human lives, which would be, I guess, like, you could say entropy, death, the heat death of the universe, chaos. And you can say, oh, but I like my life and I find meaning in my life. No, but it's all pointless, because in the end it's totally random, and, like, anything could happen to you at any time, and you'll probably just suffer a ton, and like then at the end you're going to die and it's all going to be meaningless. That is the one narrative that steamrollers everything, and the one principle that defines every single person, every single thing you might do. There's no nuance, there's no opposition to that. It's just this one monolith. And the part, obviously, in a nihilist, materialist, nihilist universe, there wouldn't be like original sin, but there's kind of a similar idea as far as suffering, with like things are so random. First of all, you're not perfect, and there's no grace, so to speak. So if you make a mistake, you're just gonna suffer for it and probably like ruin your life, and nobody cares, and that's just that. And then because of your imperfection and the imperfection of the world, you just die, and then it's all pointless. There's a similar like atmosphere of suffering and being a messed up creature with a messed up fate that's also similar across both of those. So yeah, I think that the idea of an authoritarian God and of hell kind of transmuted itself into this sort of pit of like just materialist nihilism, which is similarly simplistic. And the antidote to both of those fundamentalisms and very strict ideologies would be, I would just say, like life, and a perspective that is acknowledging life, something that's more organic and complex. And this could be religious or spiritual, or it could be like secular and just like about humans and living beings. But in both cases where you have, let's say, like the kind of optimistic nihilism, that there's a YouTube channel, Kurzgesagt, that they talk about optimistic nihilism, which is where I got that term, that they put forward, and or there's like more open-minded religious frameworks for things. And either way, there's a similar, it's more of a way of being, but I don't quite in words, but like instead of being so black and white and monolithic, there's like nuance, there's an organicness, there's like an interdependence, there's a considering of different angles and life to it. And like that gives you balance, and that gives you somewhere to put your feet, instead of it just being this one monolithic thing that if one part of that gets shaken up, first of all, you're screwed, but then also, and it's also forcing you to block out whole swaths of reality. Like believing in eternal conscious torment, you block out, let's say someone has a very rich, fulfilling, beautiful life, or even, suffers a lot and is virtuous in some way through that. It doesn't matter at all because they're going to hell if they're not Christian. And versus, denialism too. Let's say someone has a beautiful, fulfilling life in the moment, but it gets all grayed out because all you're thinking about is, well, they're just going to die and it's all pointless, and also anything could happen at any time and nobody would even care if it just all got uprooted. So the kind of perspectives that I have found that combat both of those, again, are just like, how it's just like more grounded in reality and like more common sense and admitting of nuance, admitting of change and possibility and like life and like interdependence and different scales of things and different perspectives on things. And again, it's not any particular philosophy, even though I personally have quite a spiritual or religious like imagination and way of seeing the world. That's just the way that I am. But it's not a particular philosophy. It's more of like a way of seeing and a way of being. And I think if you have that kind of but that sort of common sense, it's not like a strict dogma either. Like, you can't necessarily put it into a strict dogma, which is why it's hard when you're raised in a fundamentalism thoroughly to get out of that without falling into another one, because that's something that has to crystallize out of experience, that just gives you like an instinct for stuff and gives you like a perspectival awareness, and a sense of scale and a sense of place, and it's, yeah, more like groundedness. But you can't really condense it so easily as you could condense a dogma. Which I suppose is, the problem, or which I suppose is why, rather, it requires patience to do like deconstruction and reconstruction, because it's not simply a matter of finding the right set of facts and principles and memorizing them. It has to be a more lived thing, because I'm not just trying to switch from one dogma to another. I'm trying to step out of one very limited type of world into something much richer and much subtler. And I think this also connects to stuff that I've discussed about like poetic language and parables and the world versus the kingdom, or like versus faith, that it's a different mode of living, not just a different set of facts. But that also means that the religious materials of my youth aren't like, how do I say this? It's like the philosophy behind them and the spirit of the thing that like made it harmful, or makes it harmful. It's not like, I don't want to get into the opposite kind of purity culture. And my sister and I were talking about this, because one of her professors is really prolific about like purity culture, modern purity culture, modern secular purity culture, which is the same thing in different terms. And I don't want to fall from one purity culture into another. So there's a certain idea that, religious fundamentalism harmed me so much in the past, I had better never engage with anything from over there ever again, lest I become infected again. The idea of God harmed me so much, I had better never believe in a personal God again, because I'll fall back into that. And certainly, I do have to tread very lightly around those concepts, and, well, from my perspective, God won't just let me back in. Like, I feel myself keep getting pushed away and pushed away and pushed away, when I would like to have more of a formal expression of faith. Anyway, it is dangerous for me, like, and it has to be careful after I've been hurt so much by it and twisted so much by it, but at the same time, it's not about the form of those things, but rather the spirit and like the way that they were used. But like, if I get too much into the idea that it was just religion that is harmful and false, or just fundamentalist religion, just like falling from one authoritarianism into another authoritarianism of God versus of matter, I could fall from one purity culture based on the idea of sin to another purity culture based on the idea of, I guess, like political correctness. So this is the part where I insult or like talk bad about the left, I guess. But I'm not going to say anything more harsh than people on the left have said, kind of thing. Like, but I don't not acknowledge, I'm not saying that that either side is, no, stop, not either side. I'm not saying that modern secular culture of the youth is morally pure. Because, especially again for someone like me, very primed to fall into purity culture, there's plenty of purity culture on the secular side too for me to pick up on. And especially if I just abandon everything that I grew up with and go straight into something else with no anchor and no nothing, the other purity culture is just going to get me. I want to be careful of how I say this because I don't want to I'm not attacking my generation and my people with similar political opinions in the same way as like the people that I grew up with would attack them. And let's say you go on Tumblr as any person of any age, but let's say you go on Tumblr and you take everything that's said there at face value, you're going to get moral OCD because it's a petri dish for that. Because, you're exposed to every single other person on the internet, and a lot of them are young, and then they're making these, like, absolute statements, and purity culture is, again, not about one set of dogma. It's about the idea of dogma itself and stuff like it's based on like a fundamental analogy, right, about purity and uncleanness, but like let's say it's bad to say a swear word, and if you say a swear word you're unclean, or it's what I'm trying to think of an example that's like affected me. It's just different type of uncleanness. I feel uncomfortable talking about this in detail in this setting because I know that most of the few people who watch my stuff, because I do this for me, really. I certainly don't know who in the world I'm trying to attract, but most of the people who do watch it are like conservative politically and socially, and generally with people who are conservative politically and socially, I'm not going to make huge critiques of. I'll obviously acknowledge that there's flaws and there's efforts within my side of things to clear it up. You don't have to just go straight to the other side. Like there's critiques made from within too. But I kind of go more to the side of I get on the defensive more. So it's not a safe space. And I don't feel that it is for like going into a deep critique of like leftist spaces. But I'll just say and acknowledge across the board, there's purity culture in the secular world that I'm in, and there's purity culture in the religious world, and it's very easy to go from one to the other. I feel like a good example is in fandom in secular spaces, because that doesn't have as much real life consequences, but you think it does with how serious people are about it. Like people will just fight over like literal fictional characters, but then they'll make blanket statements they'll make blanket statements, and they'll be like, this ship is the only canon ship. Like, these two characters are the only ones that could ever be in a relationship, and if you think otherwise, you're wrong. I don't even want to interact with you. And, or like, if they, you know, have this certain dynamic in their relationship, that's, or, there's a lot of, like, puritanism about, showing certain content or writing about or being entertained by certain content and not recognizing the gaps, the difference between fiction and real life, and the difference between thoughts and actions and all of that. It just gets blanketed into, if you interact with this at all, then you're an evil person, and it's the same as if you were going out doing it, and all of that. And it's the usual, you know, mistaking the surfaces for the depths. You know, same type of thing as anybody who says that, like, being gay is the same as being a pedophile, when one thing is a consensual relationship and the other is non-consensual. And that's the dividing line. But you're looking at, like, that person is looking at, like, the appearance of things instead. Like, if you read a piece of fiction in which somebody sexually abuses somebody else, that makes you must secretly want to do that to people, and you're messed up for liking that or entertaining that thought. Yeah. Where was I even going with this? As I say, it'll give you moral OCD, just like religion will give you moral OCD. And that's all I have to say on, like, the general phenomenon. There's purity culture in both, and it's important to, like, recognize the abstract signs of that and try and counterbalance it, especially if you spend a lot of time on social media, because social media is great at that, because everybody's on the internet. Yeah. And I think it's also great at just, like, guilt, you know, just, like, because you can see all the horrible things that are happening in real time and people urging you to activism, and you feel the weight of all the global suffering instead of having a sense of proportion to help where you can in your local scale. It's all been said before, and it's a known fact. But again, the solution isn't, well, if the secular people are being bad, if the secular people are being fundamentalist, I guess I should become a religious fundamentalist to combat it. And that's most of what I see is just the two of them fighting. That's not actually true. Most of what I see is people, like, self-correcting or correcting within communities. But I was not intending to talk about, like, abstract or universal principles of avoiding purity culture, avoiding authoritarianism, because I have a certain experience with it that is unique to me. And I've been working through that sort of balancing act that is. Yeah, I've actually made myself super nervous talking about, like, political, cultural stuff, because that is such a minefield, and I still haven't found the proper articulation of it, especially not for whatever random people that I don't know specifically whom I'm talking to. So I'm having a hard time getting back on track. But I have definitely noticed a funny little thing that is called, I have simply, in a lot of ways, recreated the abusive dynamics of the religion that I was given, just within the secular world. Again, I'm speaking only about myself and the solutions that I have found only for myself. This is the way that I am wired and what I noticed. So, like, I grew up believing in, it's just like more complex. It's more complex than one thing. Again, it's more complex. The whole thing of like deconstruction, I really should not have gone into all that Tumblr stuff. I'm like so off track now. But yeah, if you know, you know, and if you don't, then you don't. But my idea is that it's more complex and requires, pulling from all sides. If you're at least for me, it requires pulling from all sides. I don't want to just forsake an entire part of my material within me that I have to work with because that leaves me unbalanced. Even if that requires doing the whole religious deconstruction and reconstruction, which is very delicate and like painful and uncomfortable, it's worth it because I need that stuff. Because I still need it. Because otherwise I'll just recreate the same thing with different materials that I actually also have no familiarity with, which puts me at even more of a disadvantage than over on the religious playing field, where at least I'd grown up in it and had kind of coping mechanisms to get through that. For instance, I used to believe in a God that's like and Christ that's like a personal God that is the principle of all things and the source of all things, and that kind of takes all of the responsibility upon himself. I have my free will, and I was certainly very guilty about that and taught to do that, but in the end, God is in control, as they say, and God is in charge of making the final decisions, of making sure that everything turns out all right, of managing the immense load of human suffering and human wrongdoing. And I did believe in that force and trusted to that force, which of course was a tyrannical force that was very bad. But the point is, there was that force that had the final say in the universe. Now, having kind of gotten rid of that force, I'm left with kind of a vacuum. Or like even just having a different idea of who God is. Because again, fundamentalism does not give you the tools to be a human and to grow and to change. It just gives you one thing, and if that one thing breaks, you're screwed. You're left with nothing. So there's no way for me to like as soon as I alter one thing, it kind of all comes. So like losing the idea of like the omnipotence of God in the sense of being very authoritative over every little thing in a direct way type thing. Once I lose that, then it's like, well, I guess individual human wills or non-human wills or matter is all that we have. And that becomes like, it has been easy for me to do like, because the ideal would be, right, the ideal would be to say, well, there doesn't have to be one authority over everything, and there isn't. It's a lot of interdependent, emergent, and eminent things on different scales. But my mind has this space for an ultimate authority. So, in the absence of capital G God, what rushes in to fill the vacuum that is there? And it's easy to have rush in, like, the opinions of every single person on the earth, and basically the opinions of every single person on the internet, or that I might happen to encounter in the moment. That's a terrible God. That's actually it might be a worse God than like a tyrant theological God, because at least that God was designed to rule the world, even if it does it in a bad way. The random opinions of every human being on the internet was not supposed to be God. Yeah. And then, there's the idea of like Christ or Jesus taking on all the suffering taking on the sin and kind of being the nexus of purification and the nexus of redemption. Well, I don't quite believe in that in the same way anymore. But that vacuum is still left. So it's very easy for me to feel like I need to put myself into that same position. And to say that I have to be like perfect, essentially. That I have to be universally, that my actions, my thoughts, my beliefs has to apply for everybody worldwide in any kind of situation. You know, and because there's no more force and principle that's taking care of that for me that I can entrust the world to and be left with my own sphere of things. And then it's easy to then be like, well, I guess, no, I have to like save the whole world, essentially. And there's problems with thinking that there's one savior of the world. There's also problems with thinking that you are that person. And it really doesn't help anyone, and it actually isn't good. Like, and it doesn't even make sense. Yeah. It doesn't hold together coherently. Like, it would get to a point where I'm like, no, like, I can't believe in God anymore, or just like trust that God will take care of anything anymore, because that would mean that I'm shirking my responsibility to personally be cognizant of the entire state of the world, of the individual suffering, of every type of suffering, of every type of person, and to be like cognizant of that and not forget about it and like ideally act toward it, or at least remember it and remember that I should be acting toward it. And I'm like, bitch, what responsibility? Who gave you that responsibility? Who said that is my responsibility? And also, I would actually, even if that is the ideal way to be, is doing the most good for the most widest swath of all the other people, I would actually do that a lot better, even if it was just a placebo, if I thought that there was somebody else out there watching out for things. Because I would chill out a little bit. Like, if you can't, then you just get into paralysis. Well, I get into paralysis. Again, I know some people don't believe in God in that way, and that's perfectly fine. But yeah, back in the days when I was very naive, maybe, and when I thought that God would take care of things, and when I certainly had some illusions that were harmful to me and to others, I nevertheless did a better job of doing good in the world pragmatically and concretely, because I was focusing on my own area of influence. Sorry, I'm eating yogurt at the same time. And even people in the secular world say that you should focus on your own area of influence, and say that joy and thriving is a powerful tool in the face of oppression, and say that you need to take rest and care for yourself, and say that you can do the most good on a local scale, and say all of these things. Like, that's not actually, or at least it's not the only monolithic message of the world, or of my peers, or the people whose opinions, because of the day and age in which we live, their random private opinions come across my consciousness 24/7. That's not actually the opinion of all those people that I need to take all the responsibility. I'm choosing to put that on myself. Like, I'm picking that message out from all the messages. And I don't have to do that. Nobody's asking me to do that. Nobody's telling me authoritatively to do it. And besides, they can't even tell me authoritatively to do anything because I have free will. So, if I want to re-engage with my religion or my faith, I can do that. and nobody can stop me. And also, it might do more good in the world than trying to do things the way that I've decided that I have to do them now, type of thing. It's like, first of all, there genuinely are impulses and messages toward a worldview based in fear, shame, and control within secular culture, especially in my generation. It's there in my generation. Second of all, given that I was primed with that sort of framework that basically I have to save the world type thing, or just like a lot of that, the framework that like there's some authoritative thing that someone's going to tell me to do and I have to do that and make myself into that. It's very easy for me to pick that kind of thing out. Suddenly I'm thrown into the wide world and I have all these different things and I got to pick out which ones am I going to follow. Well, it's very easy to pick out ones that resemble the old thing, just in a new packaging. And I personally have found that for my own self, continuing, like, having a balance and kind of letting one balance off the other and letting them fight of religious material or like spiritual stuff, and even books or media that contains messages that I just overall don't agree with, but for whatever reason, or for nostalgia or whatever, I feel like listening to that keeping that sphere open, and then as well as the sphere of secular daily life that I'm in, that those two like balance each other out. And it's been helpful to continue to engage with both because it's checks and balances. And if I get too into like figuring out what is the one philosophical truth and meaning of the world, or get too into like just the discomfort that comes from being in places with like religious talk, because I just have a lot of bad association. Like I can't stay in there for too long. Anyway, when I get overwhelmed with that, I can go out and like, I don't know, go to the grocery store, or like go out with friends or something, or watch a movie or something, and be pulled a little bit out of my own head. And then if I get too into just the mundane everyday grind of things and only caring about the immediate stuff and only caring about immediate like politics, then if I go back and engage with more like spiritual stuff, it balances it out. But yeah, purity culture or ideology or whatever is an idea and a form. It's not a strict set of dogma, and it's present in any sort of space you like, whether that be a fandom about a fictional thing you would not believe how seriously people can take it, or politics, or religion, or just daily life, or anything. And if you are already set up in one, it's very easy to go from one to another, and you have to be really conscious about it, and it's very complicated. But being open to a wide range of influences, and for me, even listening to old like Bible college music, while I am not feeling guilty about doing a lot of things that those people would not be happy with me for doing, has been helpful to me in that just to stay sane and balanced. Yeah, it's all about juxtaposition.